Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on the Do Something podcast. Today, we're joined by a very special guest. We're here with Tess Koenig from the Liv Project, who is joining us to talk about mental health. The Liv Project is a creative collective determined on turning the tide of youth suicide. And we're lucky enough to have Tess, the Chief Impact Officer of the Liv Project, on our podcast today. Camden and I both had the chance to watch the film produced by the Liv Project called Liv, which follows the story of your late sister, Olivia. And we're both very moved by the film and think it's such an important and powerful message about suicide and mental health, especially. So, Tess, can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your relationship with Liv, and what the film means to you?
Yes, thank you. And thank you both so much for having me. I think what you're doing with this podcast is really awesome. So I'm super grateful to be here. I am Tess. I am a theater artist living in Philadelphia. I was born and raised in Colorado. And so was my little sister, Olivia. She was 8.5 years younger than me, and she passed away by suicide in January 2019. She battled with depression most of her life. And when she passed away, our dear friend Paula helped make her memorial service a celebration of her life, but also a chance to be really open that she did die by suicide, and be transparent about that, because there's so much shame about talking about suicide. So Paula runs a nonprofit in Boulder, and my family has known her for many years. My grandma was her first volunteer. She's just an amazing woman. And for Liv service, my mom and I put together about 20 minutes of footage from when Liv was very young to 19. And Paula saw how this footage really resonated with everyone who was there to honor Liv. And in addition to running this nonprofit, Paula is also a film producer. And she had just wrapped producing the film Quincy. And she said, you know, if you ever want to tell Liv's story, let me know. I'm here to help. And my mom and I and Liv are all very creative people. Storytelling and creativity is very much a part of our healing and maintaining our mental health. And we said, yeah, let's do something. And so Paula gathered her team from Quincy, and we just kind of started making the film. And I think what's different about it is that it is in real time. I think a lot of what we see in terms of mental health or suicide, it's very reflective. And we made this while I was freshly grieving my sister. And we had the guidance of a licensed therapist in Boulder, as well as the team at Children's Hospital Colorado and their Pediatric Mental Health Institute, who helped us craft the film in a way that didn't glorify suicide, but made a person out of so many statistics. And I think that's what we need to remember, is that we see these horrible numbers, and each one of those numbers is a person. And so we made this film and have been sharing it for several months. And I work in theater and education, and I actually left my full-time job this past January to help run the Liv Project full-time. And then COVID happened, and now everything's been on Zoom. So I've been sharing the film virtually through some private screenings, as well as some film festivals. And the feedback has been really powerful, in that people say they can see themselves in Liv's struggles. People are often left with an urgency to reach out to their loved ones, and talk differently about their own mental health. And we've had some people say, you know, after seeing this film, suicide is not an option for me. And that's, you know, the greatest thing we could ever ask for. So continuing to share the film and develop creative tools to have these really hard conversations. I think there's no easy way to have them. And I'm so grateful for you both for having me here today to have this conversation, because it's hard. And I never, you know, when I was in college, I never talked about mental health or suicide. No matter how close I was with my friends, it was just not something we talked about. And so this is amazing, and exactly what I want to do as the impact officer for the Liv Project is connect with people and exchange ideas and talk about what we can do and how we can change the way that mental health and suicide are seen in this world.
Can you please share with our audience kind of the story of Olivia and kind of what she went through, kind of walking us through the film?
Sure. Yeah, Liv was just a bright ball of light from the moment she was born. She was just so present and so funny and so talented, and so compassionate. And all of those beautiful qualities also made her have a lot of feelings all the time. And she was diagnosed with a learning disorder and OCD when she was very young, and struggled a lot with depression and anxiety and self-harm throughout her adolescence. And my parents divorced when she was very young, and that had a big effect on all of us, my brother and my sister and I, but especially her because she was so young. And then I went to college across the country when she was, 8 or 9. So we were still so close and talked all the time, but we were so far away. And she struggled a lot. And part of what kind of exacerbated her depression sometimes was excessive drinking. She was prescribed with various medications, and mixing those medications with alcohol it was not good for her mental health. And she knew that and was very cognizant of that. But I think when she went away to college, she wanted to be quote unquote normal, which is like, who is normal? What is normal, and I don't think she felt like she could really share with people when she was really struggling, or share that, if she was having a really rough time, drinking was not going to be a good thing for her mental health. And I think ultimately that was a big factor in taking her life, is those connections. She just didn't feel, there was so much shame around sharing how she felt. She was very open with us at home, but isolated a lot at school. So the film is her life, and then what happened when she passed. And that is a lot of me in my real-time grief in the form of these video diaries I was making, and trying to navigate this new world without her. And there's something about suicide grief that's really isolating, losing a loved one to suicide, because people are so afraid to talk about it. I have noticed so many people don't want to bring up the fact that my sister died. Maybe because they're uncomfortable. They don't want me to feel bad by bringing it up. But the reality is I think about it all the time, and I'd rather talk about it. And I think us being so afraid to talk about it is part of the problem. And so that's what we're trying to do with the film, is, spark these conversations.
Thanks so much for sharing, especially a little bit about the story of Olivia, and especially about the film as well. I guess a question I wanted to ask was, in the film, you actually mentioned there was a quote in the film that says, "Suicide did not end Liv's pain. It transferred the pain to everyone who loved her." And I was wondering, how has your kind of relationship with others changed after Liv's death? How do you kind of see life in like a new, in some way, like in a new form, and like with new eyes? Or yeah.
I love that question, and I don't think I've really ever been asked that. That quote felt so true when I said it, and I think it's going to feel true for the rest of my life. Like I said before, I am always thinking about the fact that she is gone. And I see everyone who loved her and knew her, how they are affected by her being gone. And I see that pain living on in them. And I feel that pain very much so living on in me. And I see the world, I think I see the struggle more. I didn't really understand Liv's depression until recently. And I struggle with depression myself, but I don't know. I see it differently now, and I just see how much pain it is. And some days my grief like morphs with my depression, and it's just so all consuming. And so I recognize and I see that pain more than I did before. And I also see how powerful talking to people is. Before Liv died, I was often afraid to use the word suicide. I don't think I ever talked to my friends, if they were having thoughts of suicide or self-harm. And there is this myth that if you ask someone if they're suicidal, it will put that into their head. But the NAMI website, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, has an awesome read about suicide myths. And that is the first myth, that talking about it will give someone the idea. It's what I learned from the therapist who worked on the project is it's the opposite. It actually gives people a sense of relief that someone is there to hear them. And so really just the power of conversations is something I didn't really see before.
Definitely. And I guess the reason why I asked the last question was I believe now around 2 years ago, a friend of mine growing up actually passed away due to suicide. And feeling I carried a lot with me is like this feeling of somewhat of guilt of like, what could I have done, or could I have done anything in order to stop this, or to change anything, or would it have changed anything? And also on top of that, sometimes I have this, I think to myself is like, what caused this? Like why I never had like an idea that this was going to happen. And also like, why did you do it? I was wondering how do you manage, as like Olivia's older sister, how do you manage those feelings of sadness and of guilt that might overcome people? And also how do you kind of grow from that? With like the project, with the Liv Project, how kind of has that helped you kind of cope in a way, or come to terms in some sense?
Yeah, I think guilt is an inherent part of grieving, and grieving someone who has died by suicide, the guilt of that is even greater. And there are still days where I feel consumed by my guilt and I'm asking myself tons of questions. And when that happens, I am starting to try and treat myself like I would treat a friend who was saying that to themselves. I would say, it's not your fault. You did all you could. And I know so much now. Like I have learned so much about how to interact with loved ones or people who may be struggling in a mental health crisis. And so I try to be gentle with myself and not beat myself up for what I didn't know before. And in terms of like the sadness, I mean, I think it's always going to be with me. And at first I was really resistant to feeling the sadness. And now when I have a big wave of it, I just kind of let it happen, and just sit with it. And, if I need to cancel a meeting or just spend all day, in my bed, I just do it, instead of fighting it, because the more I fight it, the stronger it comes.
Yeah.
So, if you're feeling that pain, just be gentle with yourself. And also, it will pass. It is a temporary, yes, I'll always have the pain, but those moments of I call them like grief tantrums, where I just like, my body doesn't know what to do. My brain doesn't know what to do. And just letting them happen, because it's okay to let them happen.
I definitely can relate to a bunch of those points in terms of like feeling that grief for sure. It's definitely something that for me personally, it's like something I'll always wonder for sure. And it's like, it's been quite a bit now, but now it still every so often comes to my mind. It's like, what if? And I feel like that's something that like I'll always kind of carry for sure. Because for me, it's been for me, it's definitely changed, or my ideas on, or my thoughts on like mental health and all that was completely shaken. Especially when one of my friends growing up passed away, only because I never thought to myself, nobody around me is going to do something like this. It always kind of felt like somebody, some other people are struggling with mental health, but I never expected it to be right around the corner for sure.
And I think that's so important to talk about, is like, it could be anyone, and it's probably everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to definitely reach out and have those conversations as well.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for sharing, especially you, Tess. That's a very impactful story. And before this podcast, we were actually able to get a few questions from our audience, and also questions that Alejandro and I had related to mental health. So I'd love to ask those now. To start off, I have a question for you guys. How do you build the confidence to ask the question, are you having thoughts of suicide?
That's such a good question. For me, it's been knowing that I was always afraid to ask that question. And my sister knew me so well, so she knew when I was afraid, and I think that prevented her from being completely honest with me sometimes. And so it's like a muscle. I wouldn't say like after she passed, I was like, okay, now I'm ready to ask people. It's more like, okay, I understand that asking someone that you're concerned about if they're having thoughts of suicide is a good thing, because it can bring relief and open up a conversation that they may feel really isolated in. So like, in my own group of friends and loved ones, I will ask. And I think before I ask, I'm like, what's the worst thing they could say? Why am I so afraid of this? What's the worst thing? The worst thing that they can say is yes, that they are having thoughts of suicide. And then what? Then, you can connect them with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, ask them more questions, give them resources, sit with them, whatever it is that they specifically need. But they could also just be having a rough day. And so I think the more that you say it, at least for me, the more I say it, the more people I ask that I'm concerned about, the easier it becomes.
I've never necessarily asked that question word for word. Have you had thoughts of suicide? I think that's definitely something I need to work on, and just honestly check in with people in their mental health. Like, because something from my perspective, I guess one of the reasons, and I feel other people would be able to relate to this as well, of why they don't ask the question, is because I feel like in this society, it's kind of like looked down upon to like having a mental health problems or any, so I think that's why some people don't necessarily ask, or they don't want to ask. And there's somewhat of the stigma of being needy. And that's definitely something that I've seen recently change. There's a lot more conversation about mental health, especially suicide as well. But for me, I definitely see you've definitely changed my perspective, as is like, if you ask a question, the worst possible answer you can get is yes. So I think, yeah, I definitely see how impactful that can definitely be.
And then once they say it, like the way Susan, the therapist on the project, always talks about it, is like the feeling of holding a secret is so painful, no matter what the secret is. Like, if someone asks you a question that you have been holding something in for so long, there's some relief in that. And now you're not the only one holding that. And now there is someone who, either as a professional can help you, or as a loved one or friend who can connect you to someone who can help you. And it just, I think, makes people feel less alone in those thoughts.
Definitely. It opens the door for sure, I think.
Yeah.
I think like it's also equally as tough to ask the question as it is to answer, because I think on the other hand, maybe something that might be a challenge is for some people going through mental health that I've been friends with or have known, a big challenge is for them to accept it themselves. And if they don't accept it themselves, then they're not able to share how they feel to others, because what happens is they feel down all the time, all these things, and then they kind of feel like, you know what, it's not really my place to be sad because I have a great life or something, where they kind of deflect how they're feeling and don't accept it at all. And so I think in that case, it's going to be very hard for them to actually express how they feel, because they feel the need to deflect it and act like those feelings aren't true to them. When in reality, even if they are going through that struggle, it's important to share that and get that out there. Would you guys have a recommendation on maybe a good way to ask the question or phrase the question or create an environment so that they'll actually be willing to accept their feelings and also share?
I think that's such a good point. Like, in talking about fearless communication, so much of the time we're like, ask people the hard questions, but also you have to, be fearless in reaching out when you are the person struggling. And I think for me personally, like normalizing uncomfortable feelings and talking to people who I know are a support, and just reaching out and being like, I'm really feeling like really down today, is like important. And, you can say like, if you don't have the emotional capacity to talk about this, I totally get it, but I just needed to like get this out of my brain to know that I'm not alone. So I think like knowing who those specific people are in your life where you can go to them and be like, I'm just not having a good time, or such and such is going on. And then I think also like actively listening to someone can help them, come to that realization that maybe they are really struggling, and saying like, I'm not gonna try to fix what you're going through. Like, I'm really just here to listen for you to say whatever you need to say, in a way that feels like they have, giving them the floor and the agency to talk about what's going on. I think is important, just that active listening.
Yeah, and I guess I have a follow-up question. On the flip side of that, someone that's willing to share what they're going through, what would be a good way to go about it? Because I feel like for other people, they have a different drawback in mind, that they don't want to alarm people, or they don't want to make it seem like it's this massive deal, even though to them it might be. So how should they go about reaching out to people, I guess, without feeling that, I guess, guilt, I would say?
Yeah, and I think that's something so many people who are struggling with depression or thoughts of suicide is like, I don't want to be a burden by reaching out to someone. But then again, going back to kind of like, how would you treat your friends or your loved ones if they were feeling this? Like, you're not a burden at all. I feel this way all the time, and again, finding those key people in your circle who you're like, okay, this is a person I know I can reach out to, or even saying to someone, if you're not currently in a mental health crisis, but like, hey, if you see me, doing this, or like, really retreating or isolating, this is a sign that like, I'm not doing well. Is there a sign for you that you're not doing well? And we can, check up on each other, or, just kind of laying the groundwork of like a really safe, open space, and having it be very mutual.
What type of changes specifically do you think that you want to see in society to like get mental health to the next step where we're more able to share and things like that?
Definitely more access to, or easier access to mental health care. And also, I think it's not one size fits all, it's, for me personally, I need therapy, I need my antidepressants, I need my art, and I need to move my body. Like those are my tools. And I think everyone, there are so many tools out there, and it's important to like find what works for you. And something that works for someone else may not work for you, but don't give up if it doesn't work for you. There is something else that may work.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I want to ask, so in terms of reaching out, I've been trying to reach out more to my family, my friends, and it's tough sometimes because I get the responses of "I'm fine, I'm good," and not much elaboration on that. And do you have like any tips like where I can actually bring the real conversation of how they are to the table? Because I guess most of the time when I ask how you're doing, it's like the very typical, "Oh, I'm good," and moving on from that. So, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I do think like "how are you doing" has been watered down a bunch to just be a pleasantry. Like, okay, we're about to have this conversation, so let me say, "How are you doing?" "Good." "How are you doing?" "Fine."
Mm,
"Okay, now we can talk." But that's such a disservice to all of us. And I think like trying to be more specific in questions,
mm,
like one that I ask my friends all the time is like, "How's your heart doing today?" Or like, well, this isn't deep, but like, "What's your favorite snack you ate today?" Like just being specific about things and then getting to the meatier stuff. Or like, if you do say, "How are you doing?" and someone says, "Fine," like, "How are you really doing?"
mhm.
Or, "I've noticed you've been isolating a lot," or, "I just wanted to see if you're okay, or if you need, if you wanted to just talk, I'm here to listen." But being more specific about the questions. Um, and, and when someone comes back with a fine or a good, like questioning that. And
Mm.
also like being mindful of when we answer, "How are you doing?" I feel like I did it when I got on this call with you. It's like, "How are you doing?" "I'm doing okay." Yeah. You know, like, and not really, I think it's just become such a pleasantry and not really an opportunity to connect.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really interesting how you bring up that it's saying "I'm good" and "I'm fine" is so watered down. But I was thinking about it earlier too. It is such a habit, and it's very interesting how like we're just straight up lying to other people constantly,
Mhm.
and it is more of just a greeting. It's not necessarily an actual question to get to know someone, and I think it'd be really beneficial down the line to kind of break that down and make it seem more real, because I feel like it comes from a good place. To ask how they're doing, it's kind, it's a nice gesture, but at the end of the day, it doesn't get you anywhere. So I think in the future, it'd be good to practice. At least, like maybe I bring that up to my friends, and like when I actually say "How are you," to mean it as a deep conversation, so that it's easier to have these deep conversations um, with from that question.
A question I had was, how do you see social media impacting other people's perspective of other people, and also like their mental health? Like, do you see that social media as somewhat of a problem in society, or is it just being used in the wrong way?
Hmm. Social media is so tricky, especially in a time when it's like one of the only things to connect with each other. Um, in my own mental health, I have found specifically like right after Liv died, I started really curating my feed of who I was following and what accounts I was following, because I would find things would come across my feed and I would like get a visceral response of like, oh, I feel terrible about myself or this or whatever. And so like trying to be really specific about what things I want to see and the people I want to follow. And also like I found myself doing it today. I was like really just in an unmotivated place this morning, and I just found myself scrolling, and like I would put my phone down and then the next thing I know it's back in my hand, and I'm like, okay, so I'm following all the things that are good for me, but I still like I'm using it right now in this moment as like a way to detach from sitting and being uncomfortable with just myself. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna like, you know, walk outside, or I'm gonna, go open my book and try to just step away for a bit. Because it's like, I feel like social media is such a blessing and a curse. It has done such amazing things and connects us. And like, thank God we have it right now. And also, it is like an energy suck, unlike anything I've ever felt before.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I guess for me, this is something an experience I had with social media, I guess, like growing up, especially like in high school. I guess like going into like a new environment, social media for me was kind of like, okay, I have to live up to the standards that social media puts. Or I see, oh, everybody's wearing Supreme. Where's my? I need to get a Supreme hoodie, even though I can't afford it. How do I get this? I need to live up to the status quo, pretty much. That's definitely something that I in the past I've struggled with. Not at all recently, but one thing that definitely helped me just escape all that in high school was actually deleted social media. I didn't delete my accounts, but I just got it off my phone for a couple months, and just to sit down and look around. It's like, how is social media impacting the people around me and like my conversations with other people? And kind of what I realized was I'd be the only person in my table or my group of friends while I was talking to them who wasn't connected on their phones, like talking or doing something else instead of being in the moment and having a conversation with the person who's right in front of you. And that's I think that's, like you said, it's like social media is a blessing and a curse, because you can connect with so many people and see so many different perspectives that you may have never seen before. But at the same time, it brings you out of reality when it wants to. And in a way, it's like for some people, I know it's like addictive. It's like it's there. It puts them in a place of, for me, I definitely noticed this, where it's like, okay, now I'm back on social media and I just find myself, like you said, just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And then I look at the timer, I think about the things I need to get done. And then it's like, oh, I should get that done. But I keep on scrolling. And then every hour that goes by, it makes me feel even worse. And it worsens my mental health and my motivation and everything else. And everything just starts slowly crumbling down for me. So I personally have like a love-hate relationship with social media. I think it's an amazing tool. There's so many possibilities with it, but I think in some of the things that people are putting out there, some of the things that social media does to us is definitely making mental health worse. And I'd love to kind of see, is like, do you see that as a trend as well?
I do. I definitely saw that with Liv. When you're talking about like having social media in high school, like I think Facebook just came out when I was in high school. I can't imagine having Instagram in high school. Like I cannot imagine. And Susan, the therapist on the project, talks a lot about like this compare and despair, kind of like what you were saying, like, oh, they're wearing Supreme. Now I have to wear Supreme, and like, I see it, and I saw it in Liv a lot. And that's like kind of part of the film too. is, you know, her body image was distorted because everything she was seeing was so perfect. And so many images are photoshopped. Like everything we're seeing that are celebrities, they have teams that make them look the way that they look on a single post. And that scares me. I don't know that I have any like insights or answers, but I do see it affecting people a lot.
Yeah, I love this discussion format. I learned a lot. I learned a lot.
Me too. Well, and like, I mean, you guys are living, you're in school in COVID. I know I keep saying it, but it just like baffles my mind. And I
Yeah.
think you talking about like what you're doing to care for yourselves is super important.
Mhm. Yeah, and I also think like that's one thing that a lot of people are struggling to find. It's like, what can I do? And I guess that also plays into like the reason why we created this podcast too with Camden is because we weren't necessarily doing anything. Like we created this podcast during COVID, and we were thinking like, okay, well, we'd say all these things that we wanted to do, all these things like, okay, I'm going to start reading books and I'm going to do this for myself. I'm going to learn this thing, but we did none of it. And it like, it brought us down in a way. So that's why we think it's so important to go out there and do something. The reason why like that word resonates so much with me is because it's not just about like doing something productive or improving or something. Like the whole purpose of it is just like find something that you love to do, find one thing that's going to make your life a little bit better and do it, and like just take the first step.